created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Hello, and welcome to part 1 of our Social Contracts podcast, hosted by the League of Women Voters of Arizona. My name is GraceMarie Theesfeld, your host for today's podcast, where we'll be discussing and focusing on the opening lines of the Declaration of Independence. As one of our nation's most enduring social contracts, the Declaration, first adopted in 1776, continues to shape how we think about rights, responsibilities, and democracy. While written nearly 250 years ago, its principles remain deeply relevant today. We're glad you're here, and we hope you enjoy the discussion. Joining me to explore its meaning and modern-day applications are our panelists, who are fabulous college students in Arizona: Mikah, Ishita, Amy, and Emra. The purpose of today's episode is about the beginning of the Declaration of Independence, the Preamble, and the Declaration of Natural Rights. We'll talk about what it meant for the colonies to break their political bands with Britain, what ideas like separate and equal station mean in today's society, and how the document explains that governments only have power because the people give it to them. The purpose of this episode is to dig into these opening sections, explore how the founders justified independence, and connect those ideas to how we think about rights, government, and change in our own lives today.
In Congress, July 4th, 1776. The unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America, when in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them. A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation.
Panelists, jumping right into our discussion today, what do you all think is meant by the term political band? And what does it signify for one nation to be politically connected with another?
I think a political band is ties, alliances, or I guess social contract between like countries, people, sometimes voluntary, sometimes involuntary, but it really is just a tie.
Right. I think when we think of political bands, it's obviously the connection between countries, but I think it goes a little deeper. It's trade blocs, it's alliances like today, like NATO. But we see even today parallels from what happened in 1776, when happened a few years ago when Britain, exited and did Brexit and kind of exited some of the other European nations. And so we still kind of see these disagreements between nations and alliances kind of break down.
To echo off of that, a political band to me means more like alliances, as mentioned, trade agreements or diplomatic ties. Back in 1776, colonies wanted to dissolve from Britain's control. So it means like the governance and relationship that countries have within one another and within their own country.
Yeah, definitely. Moving a little bit deeper into this excerpt, how do you all believe we should interpret the phrase separate and equal station? And what might that concept look like in today's society?
I think the separate and equal station is kind of the independence and self-governance, but also with equal footing. Then it was like colonies and being able to have their own like freedom, but also still be considered equals. But now in today's day and age, it's like the global scale, all sorts of countries having equal opportunity and equal respect, but also all groups of people having equal opportunity and equal respect.
Yeah, I think it's hard as people who are born and raised in the United States or live in the United States. We have this perspective that, the United States is what we should be focusing on in terms of policy. But we broke off from another country, and we had to kind of do this revolution. And so other countries are doing that now, and every nation in the world has the right to exist independently. And, in 1776, it meant that the U.S. should share and be equals on the world stage. And so I think today we see lots of different marginalized groups and independence movements. It's interesting when the United States, we're a colony and we decolonized, but then, we kind of did some of the same practices throughout history. We see kind of the indigenous sovereignty, Puerto Rico, Hawaii, like so many different instances. And so being able to, like, as people now, kind of look back throughout history and see how can we continue to live up to what the document, the Declaration of Independence, was actually trying to achieve.
Totally, yeah.
In addition, separate and equal station means that we have, the right to exist independently, as mentioned. We now contribute to voting. We are able to hold our government accountable, which is a vital part of what it is to have these rights. We fought for these freedoms and liberties of expressions, and now even now the U.S. is now recognized in the world stage. So having separate and equal station is we are independent, we have our own sovereignty, but we're also there for one another.
Right. Yeah. On that same note, as citizens of the United States, in what ways do we contribute to or uphold that idea?
I think we really prioritize social contract in this generation, at least, where we really care about each other. And empathy is something that we really want to start more conversations about, and that goes through with other countries too. The United States is gifted with having great power in the global stage, so kind of as a country, we can really uphold that idea through kind of giving other people that same respect, that same equality that we so want.
Yeah, I think there's kind of two factors in terms of this question. So I think, yes, legitimacy in the world order and legitimacy in the world, such as UN recognition, trade defenses, all of those, that kind of institutional power among nations is very crucial. But also to the more basic fact that self-determination is a human right. So trying to balance the fact that the United States is not the determiner on whether another group of people or nation can have kind of self-justification or self-determination. And so I think it should be a principle that everyone, especially in the United States, honors universally. But the reality is that kind of that international validation by other nations often determines whether that kind of independence and self-determination sticks for that group of people or country.
In addition, when you look at self-determination, it gives us legitimacy. We as a country have established certain types of rights. We've established norms, for example, democratic norms that we hold to very high regard. So through that, you see attitudes, customs, cultures be created from these types of ideologies. So through self-determination, we also become independent, that there is no one being, no one state that can tell us or give us permission what to do. We have the outward right to do so.
Right. Yeah, definitely. Another question for all of you to consider from this excerpt: to what extent should a nation justify its pursuit of self-determination to the international community? And what are the potential benefits and downfalls that might come from doing so?
I think countries really should rely on self-determination because it kind of makes them stronger, and it can be a process. It's a learning curve. That's kind of the downsides to it. We had to go through it too. Everybody, even as individuals, there's a learning curve to everything. But at the end of the day, self-determination really gives the autonomy, the freedom to grow without reliance on other countries. We've seen it historically. Countries relying on other countries, they end up succumbing to greater powers versus, being given that room to kind of grow, but still orderly. It'll strengthen its really resilience in the long run.
Yeah, I think it's a very nuanced question, and I think it goes back to me for different organizing principles. So it's the same thing you're going to do with a very large issue, whether a country is going to determine if they need to move forward and work with other countries, or how to find freedom and equality for themselves, or what that looks like. To it's the same process as a much smaller issue in your own personal life, and so I think it's always just crucial for other countries, and especially in the United States, to not go into a country thinking that we know best, but to ensure that we are listening to the people on the ground, the people who understand their history. I think that's crucial, and I think we've seen throughout history the United States kind of plays this role as thinking we know best, and we are the world's best democracy, which may be true in some cases, but it's so important because there's so many diverse places in this world that are trying to find their own path, just like we were in 1776, because the world stage didn't think we were perfect back then.
Right.
And so there's that process. And so we have to kind of help people go through that too.
Yeah.
And in terms of like justifying our self-determination, to build on it, it sets us on the world stage. We are already, we've paved our way. We've demonstrated our, in a way, dominance in certain aspects. Again, we have democratic norms that I believe can set paths through other democracies, right? In terms of that, we have a plan for stable governance. We're able to show other countries, we're able to show international allies that we also have something to bring to the table, that we are also worthy of being part of conversation, having our 2 cents into the pot, because we have perspective. And that's where I believe we should justify it in terms of who we are, in addition to maybe touching on a downside. We may sometimes be seen as aggressive or, taking all perspective, having the one unanimous perspective. I believe that through like the envisionment of self-determination of the United States, we bring a lot to the table, but it's also demonstrating that we can also take from the table, that we're willing to grow, that we're willing to continue to progress as a country, and that we're willing to take ideas from others as well, that we're not just one idea that all and everyone should follow.
Yeah, definitely. All very valuable feedback.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness.
Panelists, we just heard the Declaration state that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their powers from the consent of the governed. What are your thoughts on this principle?
I think at the end of the day, the Declaration, our government, we're a democracy, it is created to support the people. The government is supposed to represent the people. And I think the problem is, it's a big part of what is happening in today's day and age, is that people feel powerless. They feel unheard. They feel like the government doesn't necessarily represent them. And I feel like that's something that we need to really remember, is at the end of the day, we are in charge. The people, it is the Declaration, the government, everything lives to serve us. And that's kind of the social contract, the duty that the government has to us and that we must remember.
Right. I think, just as kind of Ashita mentioned, the social contract is bringing us together as people, and it's an agreement not only between the individual citizens and the United States and the institution that is the government, but also between another person and your neighbor. I think in the United States, we often are very individualistic. We have a very strong connotation and place a lot of importance on individual rights, which is important. But I think oftentimes that leaves us, otherizing different groups of people. And so, the framers of the Constitution and what they put forward was such a radical idea in 1776. The idea that the government can give you rights, that people even have rights, was radically different than what people, hundreds and 200 years before that and how the world was operating. And so what they placed into the Constitution is important, but I think that we've seen throughout history time and time again, people pushing movements to point out that we haven't quite gotten to the exact point that the Declaration was trying to live out. Right. We saw it in, the abolitionist movement when we were trying to end slavery, and when the suffragettes were fighting for women's voting rights, and in the civil rights movement when they were fighting discrimination and racism in the United States, trying to continually live up to that, what the Declaration provided us, that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator. And so I think the history of the United States is a history of struggle, and the history to actually live up to what the Declaration set forth for our people.
in addition, this declaration was an agreement of consent as well as accountability for both parties. We headway in order to say, you know what, we want to make an agreement, the social contract, that in order for government to protect our rights, which is the life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, we wanted the security, and in turn, we we bestowed consent for there to be governance. And when you look at it from a perspective of America's history, a history of struggle, as mentioned, you see how we've grown in dynamic. We've progressed from an age of where people were used to being governed instead of allowing. There is what I believe to be important when it says we the people consented for government place, for government action. But then there also takes into account that we the people have control of that action. We have influence and impact.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, all very meaningful feedback. To continue to build on that, some foundational documents like the Declaration are often described as social contract between the government and the people. In your opinion, how is that contract playing out in today's modern world?
I think there's a dichotomy to it. I think social contracts are seen in one aspect to it, but like kind of ignoring the dichotomy. As we mentioned, the government has a duty to the people. That is a social contract we have. But there's also a social contract to each other, to a community. Sure. And I think people are getting caught up in one or the other, that the government owes us something, and kind of ignoring that we also owe the people around us something. Yeah. Kind of, this government serves me, so I'm going to do the best I can to get it to satisfy every single need I have, while ignoring the needs of the people around us. So that's kind of the biggest issue. And then the younger generations obviously are more, well, we have a social contract to each other. We really have this duty to each other to look out for each other. But there's just like, I don't know, I think there's a lack of balance in what social contracts really mean, and how they're supposed to serve we the people and not just an individual.
Yeah, I think there's two things that kind of point to me kind of how the social contract is doing today in 2025. And I think one of them is the hyper-politicization we see in our society. And then two is the levels of distrust we have in our government, especially among young people. And I think we've seen time and time again across the world when people start distrusting their government, that is when we see rises of authoritarianism and different rises of kind of these strong man leaders who can kind of pull people together in some sort of way. And I think we're seeing that in some fashion now. And then the hyperpolarization that we've seen probably since 2016, but definitely was elevated during COVID, and then we've just seen consistently. And I definitely don't quite know how we move past that because people always want their team to win, no matter what side you're on. But how can we get back? There's always that question, like, how can we get back to the 2000s when government was a little more civil? And I don't know always if it was or if people just agreed more. I think it's maybe a little bit of both. But there's definitely needs to be a conversation around how can we return to some sort of era of politics or even civic engagement where people can engage in this work without because I think that's why a lot of young people stay away from it is because it's an adult issue. It's just yelling, it's arguing, it's not something I want to be a part of. So.
Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of young people have this sense still of like, oh, it doesn't really affect me. There really isn't a drive for me to get involved. But the opposite is actually true. Right. What are your thoughts?
In today's age, I believe the social contract has almost like propelled a negative arena for politics. It's become such a touchy subject that people feel that if they perceive or express the thoughts that they feel regarding how it may be the government is working, or maybe executive orders, or just in general a grievance that they may have, they feel like they're going to be perceived differently, which is, I believe, a reason why younger people are hesitant to speak their mind, hesitant to organize. However, in contrast to that, there are people who have recognized the value of the social contract, that we, through this contract, have the opportunity and the freedom to hold the government accountable, to express our rights and express our right to say, we don't want this. we do not like this. We do not consent to this, which is the foundation, which was the social contract was built upon. In order to protect life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, younger generations are now recognizing that it's a double-edged sword. Some choose to educate themselves and stay informed, and others choose to educate others and continue to propel that knowledge to others, to entities that they know can make a change.
Yeah, totally. This particular excerpt also mentions political grievances. How do you all determine when a grievance is significant enough to warrant systemic change?
I think kind of with the whole life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, when a grievance really infringes upon that, and not just once or twice, but continuously, and starts to attack livelihood, I think that's when it really is something that needs to be considered and something that needs to be talked about and really changed. And obviously change is a slow process, but that really should be like an eye-opener when something, like when it's infringing upon what our government is founded upon.
Yeah, I think at the foundation, grievances are large enough when they affect the collective well-being. And I think when the system itself kind of perpetuates harm rather than correcting itself. And I think at the end of the day, too, like, it'll be determined by the people on whether it's large enough. And so I think that's why, like, continually going through political movements, it's important to go back to the fact that the people are at the center of it. Organizing is how we get things done, and we have to kind of continually look at the community and the collective. And once systems, whether it's governments or institutions or just people in power, but once those systems you can't stop them, or there's no way for you to make kind of an impact, I think that's kind of when majority of people would say grievances are becoming are too much. It's not just a tiny little thing.
Yeah, for sure.
Grievances are subjective. We look at the collective bunch. Going back to We the People, we decided we were done with tyrant abuse, and we decided that it was large enough to make a systemic change. When we look at grievances now in date here today, 2025, an aforementioned sentiment was empathy, compassion. What do we feel, even if it doesn't directly impact us? How can it impact us? And even if it doesn't, how does it impact your community and the well-being of others? It's the infringement of persistent injustices, lack of representation, or just straight failure to find reforms. Looking at what a grievance means is when you look at the collective bunch, collective dozen, if I might, you look at how it's impacting everybody. And you look at it from the perspective of, how can this be better? Not it's subjective, and you look at long-term progression. How can this impact our country negatively or positively? But how should this be addressed?
In your opinion, folks, then, what does the idea of altering or abolishing a government mean to you? And how might that concept be interpreted in a more modern context?
Yeah, so I think it's not just about violent revolution, but it can mean systemic reform, constitutional change, or grassroots movements. And so I think when we think of abolish, it's about dismantling oppressive systems. So I think that's what they were trying to do in 1776. We saw it during the slavery, during the Jim Crow laws in the United States. But to alter is more of updating institutions to kind of meet people's needs. But that foundation of the system and who it serves still kind of exists. And so I think abolishing systems at the root of it means that we're kind of refusing to accept unjust systems. And altering is kind of transforming them into something more equitable.
Okay.
And so I think what the founders were trying to do was a little bit of both back when they were writing the Declaration of Independence.
In terms of altering and abolishing a government, it means change. We are at an agreement that we're not happy, that we're discontent with what's happening within our government, within our society. Whereas when you're altering something, we're treating it as a living, working document. We are hoping to have and continue the same format. However, we want to change things to better suit the people and our nation. Whereas abolishing our government would be dismantling the whole thing. It would be dismantling our beginnings, what we worked for, what we strive for, because we've decided the whole thing just doesn't work anymore. So in terms, it's enacting change in a way that positively suits us.
Definitely. Ishida, what are your thoughts?
I think altering and abolishing a government really is rooted in conversation. I think alteration is rooted in conversation. It is so essential for when we want change to really discuss it, to really if we want to build on this foundation that we have, the only way we can do it is through evolving our dialogue, evolving our discussions, the way we go about things. But abolishing it means, as stated, scrapping it, starting from scratch. And that, in a sense, is also conversation, because it is, okay, so what do we want? If this didn't work, what do we want now? So kind of it all really relies on conversations like this one.
Yeah, agreed. Where do you guys believe we stand in terms of the government fulfilling its side of the social contract?
I think it's falling short as of right now.
Yeah, agreed.
I think it lives to serve us, as we've discussed over and over, but it is falling short. It serves a certain group of people sometimes, and sometimes it ignores the rest. And I think that's a really big issue when, at the end of the day, you're representing a whole country. You're not representing one group of people. You're not representing yourself, your power. I think we're prioritizing power a lot instead of the people. And I think that inherently is such a big issue, because it goes against what this Declaration of Independence, what the Constitution was meant to be.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we look at the three things, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and even just starting with life, which everyone knows. I mean, you need, some sort of housing, you need water, you need food. But I think in our modern society, you need healthcare, you need community.
Yes.
And so, one of the main things that I think people have been fighting for a long time in the United States is some sort of Medicare for all. When, pretty much every other first world country in the world provides healthcare to its citizens, but there's tens of thousands of people in the United States who die each year just because they're uninsured or underinsured. And so it's, I think the United States can do tremendously more to be providing basic needs to the people of the United States, so that everyone has an opportunity to achieve some sort of flourishment in their life. And I'm not just sure that we're there yet. We see kind of this argument and the fight right now on whether or not people who are undocumented should be receiving services by the United States. But most undocumented folks are still paying taxes. They're providing Social Security. They're paying into Medicare, and they're giving back to our economy. And so there's just a continual conversation, and there's obviously very different sides to how we should go. But I think the framers of the Constitution put up these life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, and we should be pushing policy and practices in the United States that continues to uplift people. And I think the government can be a very useful tool in doing that.
Yeah, I agree. I think one other point to mention in that is the stripping away of the voting rights and our accessibility to elections that we've seen. I think that's also really troubling, and something that's been especially prevalent in the past couple of years with the political climate that we live in. And I think that's another really huge point to make here, is that is also a right that is suffering, and that's critical. We really desperately need that, and it's being stripped away. So it's just very disheartening. Amy, what do you think?
In terms of government perspective, I don't believe that they're holding up their end. It's not representative of the people or the people's needs. When we look at the standpoint of why we gave into this contract, why we consented, was because there is a foundation of accountability. There was a bilateral relationship and an agreement, unanimous agreement, that we'd hold each other accountable, that there would be benefit, mutual benefit between government and people. And at the moment, what we see in current events, it's lacking. We don't have that. There is an imbalance, a very clear imbalance, and there is unrest on behalf of the people, because we are regressing back into ideologies and into ways of being that we fought and we wanted out. So now there's this imbalance that we're hoping to correct.
To go off of that, I think that the government today is so far away from the original intent of the Declaration of Independence in terms of like upholding the social contract. I think today we see a lot of politicians, instead of serving the interests of everyday citizens and the people, they're serving the interests of their party or lobbyists or interest
Definitely.
groups.
Yes.
And I think that we as a people have that power to hold our government accountable and, make them serve our interests and show them what those interests may be.
Yeah, because that's part of the contract, right? It's checks and balances, and I think that part of it is really missing. Finally, guys, looking at the United States today, how does the Declaration continue to speak to our situation? Amy, you talked about this a little bit, but I want to hear from everybody. Do you guys think we're at risk of repeating some of the same mistakes the colonies sought to break away from in 1776?
Absolutely. Reading the Declaration, there's so much that they highlight of the tyranny and like the kind of conditions that they were living in, the colonies were living in 1776 and prior. And unfortunately, a lot of it seems very relevant. It feels like we're reading the same script over and over, like history repeats itself. And the whole purpose for this document to exist is that it doesn't. But unless we really like slow down and take into account why this country is what it is and what it's founded upon, we're going to end up in a vicious cycle that's going to lead to more and more infringement of our declaration, our life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. Like everything we striving for is now just
it's under attack.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think history is made up of patterns, and I think it's important and good to kind of look back to what it was like in 1776. And it was just this ragtag kind of group of people from the 13 colonies who broke away from Britain and kind of just believed that they could do something more. The idea that Britain as a world power and this group of people who did not have any kind of organized military, they were just doing all of these things, thought that they could fight against a world power or break away from them. And so I think that is what is important to realize, even though what people have said, we're seeing the stripping of rights, we're seeing the destruction of democratic norms right now, we're seeing kind of the rise of authoritarianism. But I always kind of choose to go back to the point and believe that the people are going to come together.
Yeah.
The people always have the power at the end of the day. We can organize. We have to remain a community of people, and that's what's going to get us through. And we've seen it time and time again. There have been instances throughout history that have seemed like we couldn't get through it, but people got through it.
Right.
And so I think that's a really important thing to kind of remind yourself sometimes when you read that news headline and you just can't imagine it getting worse.
Yeah. And I mean, to your point, Mikah, I think like what you mentioned, even though we have always had the need for these social movements, we have also always then in turn had a social uprising and social organization happen to respond to them. And I think that's really important to remind people of, because with everything that is going on, it feels very disheartening. And I think it serves as a stark reminder that the hope is there. But the goal is to not panic and to organize instead. Right. Amy, what do you think?
I mean, as I mentioned before, I believe that we're regressing into norms. We are normalizing attitudes of authoritarianism.
Yeah.
We are stepping into what it was that the 13 colonies wanted to step away from, which is tyranny. We are under similar attitudes, similar governance, and it's a time where we have the script. We've lived the script before. This isn't new. These attitudes are similar. Grievances that are mentioned in the Declaration of Independence, if you compare them to what we're living to today, it seems like we just wrote this document not that long ago. So we're not so much reinstating bad practices. Many of us, many activists, many people who are recognizing that this is what we strived to get away from, are sounding the alarms, saying this is not what we want anymore. We stepped away from King George III for these behaviors, and we won't allow a king again. We won't allow for us to be under tyrant ruling, because that is not what we did not come this far to go back.
Yeah, we didn't consent to that.
Correct. We didn't.
I also, I think it's really important to recognize that we were seen as a powerless people against Britain. Like, that is exactly like how Mikah was describing. We were powerless.
Yeah.
We're just ragtags, like, in, like, this colonies. But now, we as a country, our government is making our own people feel powerless. And it's like a crazy, like, full circle moment, because we fought another government in order to build our own, and now we're treating our own people the same way we were trying to escape. And I think it's really important to remember, like, at the end of the day, this country was founded on powerless colonies who ended up being so powerful. And just to remember that even at our most powerless feeling moments, like, as a people, we have true power. That's how our government is built, and that's not changing even when it feels like it is.
Yeah, the power is with the people.
Yeah, I also think it's important to really remember the sentiment of the Declaration of Independence, which is no kings, right? We don't want one monarch or tyrant holding all this power and authority over all of us, and we shouldn't let one person or a group of people with their own personal agenda take us back to those tragic times, and really remember that the social contract goes both ways.
Yeah.
Prudence, indeed, will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. And accordingly, all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government, and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government.
Panelists, we've got some really powerful quotes here to consider. Let's start with governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. What does a light and transient cause mean to you, and what would be considered a light and transient cause versus a justifiable means for changing the government?
I think a light and transient cause and justifiable, this comparison is discomfort and livelihood. I think this is a very important discussion. As a government, we tend to prioritize people's discomforts rather than the fact that livelihoods are at stake. The light and transient causes discomfort. That's where our social contract to each other plays. That's where we go, okay, what can we do about this as a people? We do not need our government to, like, accommodate to our every discomfort, because people are always going to be uncomfortable with something or the other. But when it comes to livelihood, when that is not being prioritized, when that is being attacked, that's when it goes, okay, this is a big issue. This is a grievance that needs justifiable change, because that's life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that's at stake.
Yeah, very well said.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we look at different light and transient issues, I mean, they're temporary problems. It might be an unpopular leader or short-term hardships that, we see within our society, but I think the founders would also remind us the importance of institutions and sustaining institutions. And so I think what we might see as a justifiable cause would be kind of long-term systemic injustice coming from an institution. So even though, a group of people may disagree with what the president is currently doing or what Congress might be doing, there's ways of organizing around those certain issues without changing or altering the entire institution.
For sure.
But I think there definitely are much smarter people than I who would say that, the United States has throughout history consistently committed some of the same injustices to different groups of people.
Yes.
And so I think there still are different arguments and things that we need to fix within the institutions of the United States.
Yeah, agreed.
In the discussion of maybe light and transient causes, similar to altering and abolishing, it's subjective again. We look at where and who is affected. When we look at a light and transient cause, we look at maybe a group of people who are unhappy and discontent with maybe a new law, governance in general, maybe a new leader in power. And what is necessary is looking at the root of the problem. Are we looking at systemic injustice that we see formulated in a different, package, or same word, different font? So, and then we're looking at what is a justifiable cause for changing government. It's having a living working document. It's altering but not abolishing, because we have to continue being truthful to the institutions that we created, the institutions that keep us accountable, keep the government accountable. Because what would it look like if we don't have that mutual relationship? We're living that right now. And we're seeing that it's not in the favor of the people. And what takes for it is recognizing long-term, plausible long-term effects. What does this look like for the United States?
Yeah.
And what can this lead into? Because going back, we stepped away from a tyrant. We stepped away from a monarchy. We decided that we wanted to have self-determination and autonomy. And what does that look like? Is that being threatened? So answering questions of livelihood, long-term, what does that mean for us?
I want to go back to the concept of empathy, and for, let's say, one group of people, what may be a light and transient cause could, for another group of people, be their natural rights at stake. So I think it's important for, as a collective, we really, have that camaraderie with one another, and stand up for those natural rights.
Yeah, very well said. Our next quote for consideration is it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such a government and to provide new guards for their future security. What do new guards look like? We know that it's different from the notion of a guard in terms of policing or military enforcement, but how do you think people feel about this being their duty?
Yeah, I think it is so crucial. I think when in 1776 it was about new leaders, new institutions, new protections, and when we were kind of forming the republic. But today, I think it means a lot of things, but I think it kind of points to the importance of new leaders and leaders in our society, people stepping up to safeguard freedom for the next generation. And we've seen that countless times throughout history. It's so crucial that we don't just have people who are necessarily affected by the issue, because sometimes those voices are, lost in the shuffle. But people are standing up for one another, kind of what Emra alluded to earlier about empathy. And there's the famous quote, "Injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere." And so that it's so crucial that people are continually standing up for injustice that is happening to others and not just themselves, because we can't be stuck in just saving ourselves. I think that goes back to the importance of the social contract and understanding that we live as a collective in the United States, and that, even when what we see happening in Washington, D.C. or in Los Angeles, with the National Guard being called, and kind of these takeovers of these cities. But, we might be sitting here in Arizona saying that's not affecting us, but we don't know where it's going to go next. And these, are our neighbors. And these are people we live with in the same society. And so what I think they are kind of talking about of new guards and securing the future, it's crucial for each and every one of us to continue to be good stewards of our democracy.
Yeah.
And be thankful for, the country and the world that we live in, but also just not take that for granted and continue to stand up and protect the freedoms that we have been granted.
And an abstract concept of new guards is conversation. Inherently, conversation is what creates change. It is what the young leaders who are rising up and, talking out, it's all rooted in conversation. And kind of creating an environment and a system where we can promote all sorts of conversation, really practicing that freedom of speech to the point where people can feel safe saying what they believe, but also really listening to each other, practicing that empathy, talking about what feels important. That's a very important safeguard for our futures, especially because starting conversations now, keeping it going, making sure that in the future that we never inhibit our freedom of speech. That's the number one way to create change and protect ourselves from the kind of oppression of silence.
In addition, what new guards look like is empowering youth, empowering incoming perspectives. we have a wide set of amazing people in this country that can provide so much to what we see now. Different perspectives allow us to create change. And through that is instilling that power into them, that their voice matters, that they can indeed make change and see it happen and carry it throughout, because through our time we're safeguarding what we know as democracy. We are seeing a downfall in democracy at the moment. We're trying to prevent that. But for the youth incoming that are learning and who know and understand the value of our country and what it is we had to go through to get to where we are now, teaching them that their perspective and that their organization is just as valuable as what the colonists did, what we're doing now. Everyone who has participated in any movement, that they're capable of that power as well.
Yeah, definitely. Panelists, to wrap up our podcast, I want us to consider the use of the term despotism. What does this mean to you all, and how does this term play a factors in today's government, if at all?
Despotism definitionally is the exercise of power in like oppressive and cruel ways. And I think going back to the Declaration of Independence, it was created to destroy that. It was just created to destroy despotism, but unfortunately we're not. We're, in a weird way, we're more encouraging it than we have in the past. I think we live in a day and age where our government's overreaching. A lot of people feel powerless. They feel oppressed because of the laws that are being overturned or the laws that are being passed. In all these senses, the people are feeling powerless. They're feeling like victims to our own government. And that is a very, very important conversation of its own, which is why we're here. I mean, we were created, this government, the way our system works was created to counter it, but we're only promoting it.
Yeah, and I think despotism isn't necessarily just about one ruler, but kind of a system that is denying people agency. And so, as Ashita kind of alluded to, we're seeing the breakdown of democratic norms in our society. And so I think it kind of, despotism is what we're seeing in terms of, I even myself worrying, like, how can our democratic system be breaking down through elected leaders? You know what I mean? And so, I think, but it's also important to kind of come back to the idea of what the Declaration was getting to. I mean, it was a radical document, but it was also exclusionary in a few different ways, and not necessarily in its wording, but in its practice and how we've seen it kind of play out throughout history. So I think it's important to kind of keep pushing through what we have seen and what we are currently seeing in our society, and point back again, as Ashita mentioned, the Declaration was kind of a document that was, its purpose was to destroy the despotism of the time. And we've seen throughout history movements of people, abolitionists and suffragettes and civil rights movements and the LGBTQ plus movement. We've seen people continue to destroy despotism in hopes of continuing to live up to what the Declaration's intent was. And so, I mean, I think that in some ways is the history of the United States, and it's repeating itself in that way, is that we're continually trying to live up to this radical idea of living in a world of equality.
Yeah.
In short, we did not consent to a king. We did not consent to tyrannic leaders at all. The foundation of the Declaration of Independence was essentially our breakup letter. We are done. We do not want to do this anymore.
Yeah.
I'm never coming back. And we didn't.
Yeah.
And we did it, and we flourished. And we became this great nation that has freedoms, that has liberties, and we're proud of that. Americans have a sense of patriotism, and they carry that on their shoulder, and it's a badge of pride. But you see despotism today, and we are falling back to what we walked away from, and we've lived this book, and we're living it again, and we're adding to it, we're writing to it. We have newer movements, we have people who are telling us this is not right. We're ringing the bells, and we are talking about it. We're having conversations where we acknowledge that we didn't consent to having no autonomy, having no say, feeling that we had no self-governance, or at the very least that we were not our own individual, because as mentioned, it may not be happening to you, but it is happening to others, and how quickly can that affect you and happen to you in the long-term run. So playing in today's government, we see that very clearly. It's in our face. But we're working towards, moving away from that, because we never signed up for that. We signed away from it.
That's where also the power of education really comes into play. I think for, citizens to recognize the signs of despotism is really crucial. And like today we see a president who dismantled the Department of Education, and it's like, why are you doing that? Like, there's some ulterior motive to that. And I think that it's easy for despotism to be allowed and occur when there's an ignorant citizenry. And I think education is so crucial to remind citizens of their power and, not allow despotism to occur.
Yeah.
With the declaration being like a breakup letter to despotism, it sometimes feels like we're slipping back into a toxic ex. And I think it's really important to remind ourselves why we left and remind others.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back into, the foundation of the Declaration of Independence. Going into education, we felt empowered enough to say we're walking away. And we ourselves, through normalizing despotism, where we're taking away that power, we're taking away our own voice, and we're minimizing the change that we as the people can make, because it's obvious that there's an alternate agenda that does not include the people. It does not include communities. It does not include certain, it only favors a certain type of individuals in the country. And through the use of education, through the use of a voice, of literacy, of political literacy is the term that is important here. It's teaching young voices. It is teaching everybody who has access to a screen, has access to a library, that knowledge is powerful. Education is powerful. Agreed. And that is the most important weapon one can have. The knowledge of their own rights, the knowledge of our country, because if you go back to the basics, you understand that there's a lot being taken away from us. And it's being taken away swiftly and without us knowing. So just understanding, going into the knowledge of education of where we are and where we're headed, that's important.
Yeah, very well said. Well, thank you, panelists, for all of your thoughts. As we wrap up part 1 of our social contracts, we've seen how the ideals written in the Declaration of Independence still spark questions and conversations about our shared responsibilities today. The perspectives shared by our panelists highlight that these principles are not just historical, they're ongoing commitments that shape the way we live and govern together. Thank you for being part of this discussion, and we hope you'll continue reflecting on what these social contracts mean in your own life and community.
In our next episode, we'll explore the modern-day similarity to colonist grievances against King George III and how their critique of monarchy shaped the foundation of American democracy. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world.